And we're back. This is Hadronic Charge, and we're with Greg Bennett, the founder of Norwescon. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad to be here.
Since you're the founder, I'm really interested in how did Norwescon get started? How did you start Norwescon?
Well, the idea goes back early before we ever thought of Norwescon to 1976. I was living in Seattle at the time. I was working for Boeing, and went to the World Science Fiction Convention in Kansas City, Missouri that year. And just in the planning to go to that WorldCon, it started occurring to me that it would be great to have a World Science Fiction Convention in Seattle. And well, to close a long story, we got back from the WorldCon with a couple of great ideas in mind. One was to start a local chapter of the L5 Society, which is a space industrialization society that has recently merged and become the National Space Society. And the other one was the other great idea was to start a bid for a World Science Fiction Convention.
You have to provide a certain amount of activities going on or whatever to have a bid, kind of like an expo, like an expo World's Fair.
Well, the World Science Fiction Convention is about the biggest SF convention that's held every year. In fact, so far, recently especially, it has been the biggest. And you get to put on a WorldCon if you win. It's a general democratic election of all the members of the World Science Fiction Society. Wondering, how do you get to be a member of the World Science Fiction Society? Well, you sign up for a membership in a current World Science Fiction Convention. Like, for example, this year's WorldCon will be held Labor Day weekend in New Orleans. And all the members of that convention will vote on a WorldCon 3 years from now. So this is 1988, so we'll be voting on the 1991 World Science Fiction Convention. Well, that was what we wanted to do, back in 1976. We wanted to bring the WorldCon to Seattle. Seattle is a great city for science fiction. Sure. Has probably more SF readers per capita than any other city.
I know it has more bookstores per capita.
Yeah, it has more bookstores, and to support the idea of having a WorldCon, we wanted to get a committee together. Obviously, it takes an enormous committee to run a convention, and nowadays the WorldCons are getting up over 10,000.
Have you ever put another convention on yourself before this?
No.
No. So your first attempt at a convention was going to be a bid for WorldCon?
Right. Yeah. The first thought was I'd been to a couple of SF conventions and knew what the WorldCon was all about. And that was, I guess you could say it was a limited scope of the science fiction community, knowing what the biggest convention was like, and not knowing what the local community was like.
That's true.
But our thought was, well, okay, it's going to take a committee. We figured it would take us about 5 years to get together the ability to put on a WorldCon. And so, to attract people to that idea, we started the Northwest Science Fiction Society. Out of that, at one of the first meetings of the Northwest Science Fiction Society, one of the fellows who was one of the later chairman of Norwescon, Steve Bard, stood up and said, hey, we've got to host some kind of convention to prove to the science fiction community that we can run a WorldCon. And out of that came Norwescon. We started it as a practice WorldCon. And at the same time, we continued our bid. We were bidding for the 1981 World Science Fiction Convention.
What year was the first Norwescon?
1978.
78.
Yeah, and there were a couple of smaller conventions that were a mixture of science fiction and comic book interests and things like that held before that, called CCon. That some of our folks worked on, some of the folks that are still on the Norwescon committee.
Well, that's fascinating. Did you put on all of the first original conventions? How many conventions did you put on yourself?
Well,
committee?
Yeah, well, with the committee got started. The first Norwescon was March, last full weekend in March in 1978. And then I was the chairman of that one, and Norwescon 2 1 year later. And then right in the middle of the planning for Norwescon 3, we lost the WorldCon bid, just barely squeaked by with a narrow margin. Otherwise, we would have been
about like 13 votes.
Yeah, by 18 votes.
18 votes.
Was the final total out of about 2,000 votes cast. At that time, then I found out I had a great job working at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And so I moved down there to follow my dream of working on manned advanced space program, and sort of told the committee, well, it's all yours now.
Keep going, that they did
Yeah.
apparently, because it looks like it's really a big success.
And that was right in the middle of preparation for the third Norwescon. Just to contrast the scale of things, last year's Worldcon ran about 8,000 people. They've been over 10,000 people.
Amazing.
Yeah, last year was in England, so it's a little harder to get to. So not as many people showed up.
Is it usually in the United States, but sometimes in other countries, or is it? What?
Yeah, lately it's been in other countries more often than not, but it hops around. There are all kinds of complex rules about which region of the U.S. can bid which year, and things like that. And foreign countries can bid any year. Foreign countries, anyone outside North America. And so it was in England. It'll be in Copenhagen in 2 years from now. But
Do they have it every 2 years or every 1 year?
it's held every year, Labor Day weekend.
How did you get interested in science fiction?
Oh,
What started you on?
That's science fiction was kind of how I learned to read. As a matter of fact, I went to the school library when I must have been 10 years old or so, or 9 years old, learning to read. Picked up a book called Scavengers in Space by
Scavengers in Space.
Alan E. Nurse, who wound up being the Toastmaster at the first Norwescon. I was really surprised. I dug out that old book and hadn't realized the fellow that we had selected as our Toastmaster was the fellow who wrote the first, I think the first book I ever read. And of course then I embarrassed him by telling that story at the banquet at the first Norwescon.
Are you still a part of this Northwest Science Fiction Society?
Yeah, well, now they gave me a life membership with the caveat that death does not release me, so.
Northwest and Houston Science Fiction Society.
Right. We come back every year for the convention.
Do you still have, I would think that you would still have some say in what goes on at the conventions. Do you still anymore? I mean, if you come in on a committee meeting, I would think that they would listen to you, wouldn't they?
I don't know, I express opinions and sometimes they listen. I think that's why Rick Sternbach is the artist guest of honor this year. I'm not sure, but I think so.
What was the best Norwescon that you can remember?
I think actually it was the second one. It was very smoothly run, so we didn't have a lot of problems.
79?
Right. Yeah. The first one was practice, and we had a few flubs, but it was just great fun. And 412 people showed up, which we thought, in fact, at that time, that was a very large regional science fiction convention. The second one we held at the Hyatt at the airport, the same place, same site they had for the 61 World Science Fiction Convention. Of course, the hotel was twice as big, and the convention had 750 people. And it
almost doubled the second year.
Yeah, and it went over 1,000 for Norwescon 3, and now it's been up. I think the largest Norwescon so far was Norwescon 9 2 years ago, where they had over 3,000 people show up. Of course, I was fan guest of honor that year, so I'm sure everyone showed up.
Yeah, everybody showed up just to talk to you.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Oh, great. We'll be right back with another interview in just a moment.